Hittites. Around 1200 BCE, one of the most powerful empires on Earth simply stopped existing, not defeated in a great battle, not slowly weakened over centuries, just gone. Their capital city was burned and abandoned. 50,000 people vanished. The royal family disappeared without a trace. Their language was forgotten so completely that 3,000 years later, scholars couldn't even agree the Hittites had ever existed, and nobody, not a single ancient writer, left a clear record of what happened. This is the story of history's greatest disappearing act. The Hittites were an Indo-European people who entered the Anatolian Plateau, modern-day Turkey, around 2000 BCE. By 1400 BCE, they had built one of the four great powers of the ancient world, an empire that stretched from the Aegean coast to the upper Euphrates, from the Black Sea to northern Syria. Their capital was Hattusa, a city of stone walls and massive gates, carved, with lions and sphinxes sitting in the high plateau of central Anatolia, a city of 40 to 50,000 people at a time when most of the world lived in villages. The Hittites stopped Egypt. Let that settle for a moment. Egypt, the civilization that built the pyramids, that had ruled the ancient world for 1,500 years, met its match in the Hittite Empire. The Hittites deployed the most advanced chariots in the ancient world, 3 warriors per chariot instead of Egypt's 2. They kept iron smelting a closely guarded state secret. Iron weapons superior to bronze, an advantage they held for centuries, and they destroyed the Mitanni Empire, one of the other great powers of the age, so thoroughly that it ceased to exist. In 1274 BCE, the 2 greatest powers on Earth met at a place called Kadesh on the Orontes River in modern Syria. The Battle of Kadesh was the largest chariot battle in history. Somewhere between 5,000 and 6,000 chariots on each side, plus tens of thousands of infantry. Ramesses II of Egypt versus Muwatalli II of the Hittites. The battle ended in a stalemate. Neither side could destroy the other. And so, 15 years later, they did something that had never been done before. They signed a peace treaty, the world's first recorded peace treaty. Ramesses kept a copy in Egypt. The Hittite king kept one in Hattusa. Both copies survive. A replica hangs in the United Nations building in New York today. Then the Hittites were forgotten, not gradually, not because their descendants stopped caring. Forgotten so completely that by 500 BCE, just 7 centuries after, Hattusa burned. The people living near its ruins had no idea what city it had been. The Old Testament mentioned the Hittites 47 times. Uriah the Hittite, the daughters of the Hittites, the kings of the Hittites. 19th century scholars read those passages and called the Bible wrong. No such people, they said. The Hittites never existed. In 1906, a German archaeologist excavating a mound in central Turkey proved them wrong in a way that shook the world. But we will get to that. To understand what happened to the Hittites, you first need to understand the world they lived in. Around 1200 BCE, the Eastern Mediterranean was the most sophisticated, interconnected civilization system the world had ever produced. Egypt, the Hittites, Mycenaean Greece, Babylon, Cyprus, the city of Ugarit, all trading with each other, royal letters crossing borders, diplomats exchanging gifts, merchant ships moving copper, tin, grain, and luxury goods across the sea. It looked permanent. It looked unbreakable. But the Bronze Age ran on a hidden vulnerability. Bronze requires 2 ingredients, copper and tin. Copper was relatively common, available in Cyprus and across the Mediterranean. But tin came from one distant source, the mountains of Central Asia and Afghanistan. Every army in the Bronze Age, Egyptian, Hittite, Mycenaean, depended on a single supply chain stretching thousands of kilometers through dangerous territory. Cut the tin supply, and you cannot make bronze. Without bronze, you cannot make weapons or tools. Without weapons, you cannot maintain an empire. The entire Bronze Age military was built on a supply chain as thin as a thread. The city of Ugarit sat on the Syrian coast, the center of the Bronze Age, trading world. It was a city of multilingual merchants, scribes who could read 5 languages, warehouses stacked with copper ingots from Cyprus, tin from the east, grain from Egypt, wine and olive oil from the Aegean. Ugarit was not an empire, it was a hub, the place where every trade route crossed. And in the Bronze Age network, every major civilization needed Ugarit to function. Around 1185 BCE, a scribe in Ugarit began writing a letter. He never finished it. The clay tablet was found exactly as he left it, mid-sentence, unfired, preserved by the destruction that interrupted him. Our food in the threshing floors is plundered, and the vineyards are also destroyed. Our city is sacked. 7 enemy ships have been seen at sea. The city was destroyed that day. The scribe, the city, the trading network, all gone. The tablet sat in the ruins for 3,000 years until archaeologists found it. Ugarit was not alone. In the same generation, roughly 1200 to 1175 BCE, the following civilizations collapsed. The Mycenaean palace civilization of Greece. Every palace burned. The cities of Cyprus destroyed. The kingdoms of the Levantine coast gone. Ugarit gone. The Hittite Empire gone. Within the span of a single human lifetime, the most sophisticated civilizational network the ancient world had produced simply ceased to exist. Historians call it the Bronze Age collapse. It is one of the greatest mysteries in all of human history. The Egyptians called them the Sea Peoples. Temple carvings at Medinet Habu show them. Warriors in feathered helmets, families in ox carts, ships with bird-headed prows. No land could stand before their arms, the inscriptions say. Not Hatti, not Code, not Carchemish, not Arzawa, not Elashia. They swept through the eastern Mediterranean, destroying everything they touched. Then they hit Egypt, and for the first time, they stopped. In 1175 BCE, Ramesses III met the Sea Peoples at the mouth of the Nile. The battle was fought on both land and sea simultaneously. Egyptian archers on the riverbanks shot down into the enemy ships. Egyptian sailors capsized their vessels. On the shore, Egyptian infantry cut down those who made it to land. Ramesses III won, barely. He recorded the victory on the walls of his mortuary temple at Medinet Habu, one of the most detailed battle accounts to survive from the ancient world. Egypt survived the Bronze Age collapse. Almost nothing else did. Modern historians no longer believe the Sea Peoples were a single people with a single homeland. The evidence suggests something more complicated and more tragic. They were a wave of displaced populations. Mycenaean Greeks fleeing their own collapsed cities. Aegean islanders whose trade networks had failed. Anatolian refugees driven from their homes by drought and famine. They were not invaders with a plan. They were migrants with nothing left to lose. People running from something, carrying their families in carts, looking for somewhere that hadn't collapsed yet. For a long time, scholars blamed the Sea Peoples for the fall of the Hittites. It seemed to fit. The timing matched. The destruction was complete. But there is a problem. Hattusa is 500 kilometers inland from the nearest coast. The Sea Peoples were naval raiders. They destroyed coastal cities. Ugarit, the ports of Cyprus, the harbors of the Levant. There is no evidence of a Sea Peoples army marching 500 kilometers into the Anatolian plateau. No Sea Peoples inscription has been found at Hattusa. No carved images. No artifacts. The Sea Peoples did not destroy the Hittite capital. From the mountains along the Black Sea coast came a people the Hittites had always feared, the Casca. For centuries, they had raided Hittite territory from the north. Hittite kings fought them repeatedly, rebuilt cities they sacked, pushed them back. Over and over, the same cycle. The Casca never built an empire. They didn't need to. With the Hittite army stretched thin, fighting in Syria, defending against Sea Peoples movements, managing internal rebellions. The Casca had something they had never had before. An open road to Hattusa. Buried in the Hittite archives at Hattusa, archaeologists found a letter. It was written by a Hittite king to the Pharaoh of Egypt. The exact date is uncertain, somewhere in the last generation before the collapse. It is a matter of life and death, the letter says. Send grain immediately. In the Hatti lands, grain has failed. Send grain without delay. Save my life. The greatest military power in the ancient world was begging Egypt for food. The Hittite Empire was starving. Modern science has confirmed what the ancient letters hint at. Researchers have extracted sediment cores from the Dead Sea, the Sea of Galilee, and the ancient lakes of the eastern Mediterranean. They have analyzed, pollen records and tree rings from across the region. The conclusion, beginning around 1200 BCE, the Eastern Mediterranean experienced a severe drought that lasted approximately 300 years, not one bad harvest. 3 centuries of reduced rainfall. At exactly the moment the Bronze Age began to fall apart, the climate turned against it. Drought creates famine. Famine creates desperate people. Desperate people move. When the farms of the Aegean Islands failed, the people didn't sit down and die quietly. They loaded their families onto ships and boats and moved toward places that still had food. When the coastal cities of Anatolia ran dry, their populations moved toward the coasts and took to the sea. The sea peoples may not have been raiders who chose to attack. They may have been starving families who had no other choice. For the Hittites, the drought was catastrophic. The Anatolian plateau, where Hattusa sat, was never the most fertile land. The Hittites had always relied on grain imports from Egypt and from the fertile lands of Ukraine via the Black Sea trading routes. When the drought hit, when the trade routes began to break down, when the grain ships stopped arriving, the Hittite heartland had nothing to fall back on. An army that cannot be fed cannot fight. A city that has no food cannot hold out. Modern historians increasingly believe the Bronze Age collapse had no single cause. It was a systems collapse. Each individual problem was manageable on its own. Drought. Empires had survived drought before. Raids. Empires had survived raids before. Trade disruption. Empires had survived that too. But all of them at once. Drought weakened harvests. Famine created migrants. Migrants became raiders. Raids disrupted trade. Disrupted trade stopped tin shipments. Without tin, no bronze. Without bronze, no weapons. Without weapons, no defense. Each domino knocked over the next. Each collapse made every other collapse worse. And the entire Bronze Age world fell simultaneously. The last known king of the Hittites was named Suppiluliuma II. His inscriptions date to approximately 1207 BCE. Then they stop. He was doing something unusual for a Hittite king, building a navy. The Hittites were a land power. They had never before built a fleet. His inscriptions describe a naval battle he won against ships from Cyprus. Why was the king of an inland empire suddenly fighting naval battles? Was he trying to secure grain supplies by sea? Was he evacuating something? Was he fighting off the same raiders that were destroying the coastal cities? He left no answer. His inscriptions stop. He vanishes from history. When archaeologists excavated Hattusa, they expected to find evidence of a catastrophic attack. Weapons, skeletons, burned treasure. What they found was more puzzling. The grain storage pits, empty. The animal pens, empty. The royal treasury, cleared out. The sacred cult statues that stood in every Hittite temple, removed. Someone had systematically stripped Hattusa of its most valuable contents before the end came. This was not a city that was surprised by enemies. This was a city that knew something was coming and prepared for it. Then came the fire. Thick layers of ash and destruction debris cover the entire city. The palace, complex, the temples, the great walls with their Lion Gate and Sphinx Gate. Everything burned. But here is what the archaeologists did not find: bodies. Weapons abandoned in the streets, signs of hand-to-hand combat in the palace rooms, the kind of evidence you find in a city that was taken by force. Hattusa burned, but it did not fall in battle. The people of Hattusa were gone before the fire. Shortly after the fall of Hattusa, Neo-Hittite successor states begin appearing in northern Syria: Carchemish, Melid, Tabal. Cities that spoke Hittite, used Hittite art, maintained Hittite religious practices. Did the population of Hattusa walk south, following the old trade routes, into Syria, and rebuild their lives there? The evidence suggests, possibly yes. The Hittites may not have died. They may have simply left and started over, somewhere else, under a different name, in a different landscape. Today, at the site of ancient Hattusa in central Turkey, 2 stone lions still stand at the great gate of the city. They are 3,200 years old, each one taller than a man, their mouths open, their eyes staring outward. They were carved to guard a city of 50,000 people. The priests, the scribes, the soldiers, the merchants, the king and his court, all gone. The lions remained, standing watch over an empty city for 32 centuries, waiting for the people who never came back. Within 2 centuries of Hattusa's fall, the Hittite language was dead, not reduced to a dialect, not preserved in monasteries, dead. The people who had once spoken it had shifted to Luwian, then to Aramaic, then to whatever language their new neighbors spoke. The great imperial archives, 30,000 clay tablets recording the laws, the rituals, the mythology, and the history of the Hittite Empire, sat buried under meters of soil, forgotten, undisturbed, waiting. Only one source in the ancient world kept the Hittites alive in memory. The Old Testament of the Bible mentions the Hittites 47 times. Uriah the Hittite, the soldier King David had killed to take his wife. Bathsheba, the daughters of the Hittites who married into Israelite families. The kings of the Hittites who made the armies of Syria panic and flee. For centuries, scholars read these passages and dismiss them. The Hittites, they said, were a minor tribal group, probably invented or exaggerated by ancient Hebrew writers. Serious historians did not believe the Hittites had ever been a great empire. They were wrong. In 1834, a French explorer named Charles Texier was traveling through central Turkey, looking for the ruins of a Roman city he had read about in ancient sources. He never found the Roman city. Instead, he stumbled across something far stranger: massive stone walls, giant carved gates, the ruins of a city so large that the local villagers used its stones for their own buildings and didn't know what it had been. Texier surveyed the site and published his findings. He could not identify it. For decades, the ruins sat unidentified, clearly the remains of a great civilization belonging to no civilization anyone could name. In 1906, German archaeologist Hugo Winkler excavated the site. Within weeks, he found what no one had expected: over 10,000 clay tablets, royal correspondence, legal documents, diplomatic treaties, religious texts, and, crucially, letters written in a language no one had ever seen before. But one tablet stood out immediately: a letter from an Egyptian pharaoh to the king of a place called Hatti, the Hittites. The site was Hattusa. Winkler had found the Hittite capital. The Bible had been right all along. The tablets were in an unknown language. For 9 years, they sat unread. Then a Czech scholar named Bedřich Hrozný sat down with the tablets and started looking for patterns. He found a sentence: "Now you will eat bread and drink water." He recognized the word for bread. He recognized the grammar structure. Hittite, he realized, was an Indo-European language, related to Latin, Greek, Sanskrit, and ultimately to English, the oldest Indo-European language ever found. Hidden in clay for 3,000 years, the announcement shook the world of linguistics. An entire branch of the human language family had been sitting in the ground in Turkey, unknown for 30 centuries. The Egyptian-Hittite peace treaty of 1259 BCE is one of the most remarkable documents in human history. It was negotiated after 15 years of Cold War following the Battle of Kadesh. Both sides agreed, no more war, an exchange of political refugees, a mutual defense clause. If either power was attacked, the other would help. The Hittites inscribed their copy on a silver tablet. The Egyptians inscribed theirs on the walls of the Karnak and Ramesseum temples in Egypt, where it can still be read today. A replica of the treaty hangs in the United Nations headquarters in New York, recognized as the ancestor of all modern international diplomacy. The Hittites knew something no one else did: how to smelt iron and how to make it harder and more useful than bronze. They kept this knowledge a closely guarded state secret for centuries. Only the king could authorize the export of iron objects, and even then, only as diplomatic gifts, never for sale. When the Hittite Empire collapsed, the secret spread. Craftsmen scattered across the Mediterranean, carrying their knowledge with them. Within a century, iron weapons and tools were being produced across the region. The Iron Age, which transformed human civilization, was partly the legacy of the Hittite collapse. The Hittite tablets contain some of the world's oldest mythology. The Ilu Anka myth, a story of the storm god battling a great serpent, is one of the world's oldest dragon-slaying stories. Written down around 1300 BCE, it may have influenced the later Greek myth of Zeus, battling the monster Typhon. The Song of Kumarbi, a myth about a succession of sky gods overthrowing each other, bears striking similarities to the Greek story of Cronus, Uranus, and Zeus in Hesiod's Theogony. The Hittites shaped the mythology of ancient Greece, and through Greece, the mythology of Western civilization. The empire died. The people did not. Neo-Hittite successor kingdoms emerged in northern Syria and southeastern Anatolia within a generation of Hattusa's fall, Carchemish on the Euphrates, Melid in the mountains, Tabal on the plateau. They spoke Hittite languages. They used Hittite art styles. They called themselves the kings of Hatti. These small kingdoms survived for 500 years after Hattusa burned, until the Assyrian Empire absorbed them one by one between 850 and 700 BCE. The last direct heirs of the Hittite Empire were extinguished not by the Bronze Age collapse, but by the Assyrians, 5 centuries later. The site of ancient Hattusa, modern Bogazkoy in Turkey, is a UNESCO World Heritage Site. Excavations have been ongoing since 1906. Every season, archaeologists find new tablets, new buildings, new objects that change our understanding of who the Hittites were. The Great Lion Gate still stands. The walls have been partially reconstructed. Visitors walk through the same gates that Hittite kings once walked through, and the questions remain. Where did the royal family go? What happened to Suppiluliuma II? Who lit the fires that burned Hattusa? We still don't know. The Bronze Age world was the first globalized economy. Nations traded across thousands of kilometers. Supply chains stretched from Central Asia to the Nile Delta. A merchant in Ugarit could buy goods from Egypt, trade them in Cyprus, and use the profit to buy tin from Afghanistan. It was astonishing. It was unprecedented. It was the foundation of everything these civilizations had built. And it was exactly what made the collapse so total. When one part of the system failed, the failure cascaded. There was no redundancy, no alternative supply chain, no local substitute for tin. When the thread snapped, the entire fabric unraveled. The drought of 1200 BCE didn't appear in any ancient history text as a major event. No king declared war on the weather. No inscription blamed the collapse on 3 centuries of reduced rainfall. Ancient peoples didn't have the tools to understand what was happening to them. They knew the harvests were failing. They knew the grain ships weren't coming. They knew people were hungry and desperate and moving in large numbers. But they couldn't see the pattern. The 300-year drought that was reshaping every civilization simultaneously. Climate has always driven history. Empires rise and fall not just because of kings and armies, but because of rainfall and temperature and the slow shifts of weather patterns over centuries. The Hittites were forgotten for 3,000 years. Not because they were unimportant. They signed the world's first peace treaty. They fought Egypt to a standstill. They held the secret of iron. They shaped the mythology that shaped Western civilization. They were forgotten because nobody wrote down what happened at the end. No Hittite scribe left an account of the last days of Hattusa. No neighboring king recorded the fall of the empire. No refugee from Hattusa sat down years later and described what they had seen. The collapse was too sudden, too complete, too overwhelming for anyone to stop and write it down. History is only as permanent as the people who remember it, not the empire, not the king, not the army. What survived? 30,000 clay tablets baked hard by 3,000 years of burial. Stone lions standing watch over an empty city. The peace treaty on the walls of Egyptian temples. 47 references in the Old Testament. The language hidden in the ground. And the iron. The Hittites kept iron smelting secret for centuries. When their empire fell and their craftsmen scattered, the secret spread everywhere. The Iron Age, an era that transformed human civilization, was partially their gift to history. They didn't intend to give it, but they gave it anyway. Around 1200 BCE, someone in Hattusa made a decision. They removed the sacred statues from the temples. They emptied the grain stores. They cleared the treasury. They took what they could carry. And then, for reasons we still do not fully understand, they burned the city. They were leaving behind Then they walked away. 50,000 people walking south towards Syria, carrying what remained of their civilization on their backs. We don't know if they looked back. We don't know if they knew that the language they were speaking would be dead within 2 centuries, that the city they were leaving would be covered by soil and forgotten for 3,000 years, that the lions at the gate would still be standing long after everyone who knew their names was gone.